The evil that is Emu has reached an all new low, as this man, woman, thing, yeah, let's go with thing, as this thing that sits on top of the world just condemned Davy D. Xebec to not only hunt down and snuff out the light of his own wife and son, but every living creature on the island, destroying both the remnants of the Davy clan and God Valley as a whole, forever erasing this day from history, so that nothing from this moment forward would ever be able to threaten their claim as king of the world. But what they didn't count on is Xebec's incredible will and desire to screw them over. Because coming off the last chapter, where that massive combined attack between 6 of this era's most powerful people to sail the sea failed to bring Emu down, leading to them provoking Xebec by threatening his family in order to get him close enough to stab him with their weird, shadowy tendrils, lowering his will just enough for them to use Dami Reversi. But even that wasn't enough to completely overpower this pirate, who is still able to fight back just enough to give Emu one more verbal slap to the face, by revealing that he knows the true history and that Davy D. Jones was the king of the world before Emu. Something that really gets under Emu's skin. Like seriously, they react like a little kid you just told couldn't eat any more of their Halloween candy, and now they're going on a full tantrum. But them reacting in this way definitely means that there must be some truth to this, otherwise it wouldn't cause such a visceral response from them. And I think the obvious conclusion we can all make from this is that maybe before it was destroyed in the Voice Entry War, that Davy Jones was the king of the Ancient Kingdom. Which is a wild reveal if true, because up until this point, many assumed that Joy Boy was the leader of the Ancient Kingdom, maybe not the actual king or anything like that, but who the country as a whole looked to as their leader. It definitely adds a new twist to this mystery around the Voice Entry, which really feels like the more we learn about it, the more questions we walk away with, and I think until we finally get that Ancient Kingdom flashback, that's just how things are going to be. But now we know for sure Emu is afraid of the day that both Davy Jones and Joy Boy both return, because the two of them together are the only things that could possibly stop them. That's why they are so determined to wipe out every last member of the Davy clan here, because only a direct descendant of his clan seemingly can inherit his will. With Joy Boy, it seems a little bit more random. Like, just about anyone that has the same spirit and desire for freedom could possibly become the next Joy Boy. Of course, we know that fate also plays a role in this, and that it has already determined that Luffy will be the one to truly inherit the will of the world's first pirate. But as far as Emu knows, it could literally be anyone, so it's nearly impossible to prevent them from popping up one day. However, with the one that fate chose to become the next Davy Jones, it's both easy to predict and stop, because it could only be a member of the Davy clan. So as long as they are completely wiped out here, there's no threat of Davy Jones ever returning. Which is exactly the command Emu gives to Xebec as a final punishment for even daring to oppose their rule. And the really messed up part about this is that Emu knows that there's only 3 members of the clan left on the island: Xebec, his wife Eris who married into the clan, and their son Teach. So as he loses control of his mind and body, being turned into a demonic minion of his mortal enemy, Xebec fades away and begins his rampage across the island to hunt down the 2 people he wanted to protect the most. Starting with Kaido, who he just outright embarrasses by stabbing his sword into him and then tossing him straight into a cliff. And Linolin honestly gets it even worse, as she is just punted away like an American football and he is going for an extra point after a touchdown. Honestly, not a good look for either of them, but to be fair, they were definitely the weaker 2 out of the 6, so now that Xebec is even stronger after being Dami Reversi'd, he should be able to pretty easily take them down. And I'm guessing this is where Kaido got his emotional scar around pirates and how they will always eventually betray you. Because these 2 have absolutely no idea what's going on. All they know is that their captain is seemingly turning on them out of nowhere, and that's probably all they will ever really know about this moment, even to the present day. However, Whitebeard seems to be a bit quicker on the uptake and can tell that something's not quite right about Xebec, but even he doesn't exactly know what's going on. Which makes me wonder if once he starts to hear about the One Piece from Roger a few years later, if he's able to connect the dots then. Like, oh, so that's what that thing we fought was. And this now gives me a new appreciation to his declaration at Marineford about the One Piece being real, because I always thought it was just his way of passing on the will of being a pirate onto the next generation, and for them to continue to defy the World Gov in search of it, to make sure that his defeat here doesn't deter people from following their dreams of becoming pirates. But now it seems more likely that he recognized that someone of Luffy's generation, if not Luffy himself, would be the one that would finally be able to bring down that monster that sits on the empty throne, and sent him down that path to directly oppose Emu. I don't know, I might be reading a little too much into it with this new added context, but I really like the idea of that being Whitebeard's intention there. But getting back to the fight, Whitebeard puts up the best showing against his captain out of the three, clashing equally with him for a bit before finally being overpowered, and sent flying into one of the giant twin rocks that represent God Valley, knocking it down and symbolizing the fall of the island. Surprisingly enough though, Xebec doesn't immediately clash with either Roger or Garp here, almost completely ignoring them in order to go search for Eris and Teach. And while he does, we quickly check in with the remnants of his crew we saw in the last chapter, starting with Captain John, who is just barely holding himself together as he staggers his way across the island, assumingly trying to find a boat to escape on. Then there's Gonzley, who, like we all predicted, was completely destroyed by Shiki, but not as much as John, since he's able to actually run while trying to find a way off the island. And speaking of the Golden Lion, we see him whistling away as he just happily floats towards the coast, carrying one of the treasure chests. Also, funny note, the chest that he's carrying looks really similar to the one we saw Shanks crawl into, so for a split second, I thought he had somehow picked it up. But on the previous page, we do see a member of Roger's crew holding the actual chest as they escape towards the ship, and you can tell it has Shanks inside because you can see the little Z bubble that indicates he's sleeping inside the chest. So yeah, happy ending for Shanks, he made his way to his adoptive family. Not so much for Dragon though, who we only get a single shot of in this chapter as he's hunched over in the exact same pose Luffy was when he thought Kuma killed his entire crew, cursing himself for failing to save even a single baby. This is going to be an even more drastic turning point for Dragon than seeing the hunt itself was, because he promised a dying woman that he'd save her kids, and yet despite all of his effort, he failed to keep that promise. And I think the despair around this day will follow him around for a couple of years after he quits the Marines, until sometime in the near future, he'll meet one of the kids he did manage to save on that day, and learn that after saving them, they went on to save over 500 people, giving him some relief over his failure to save Shanks, and setting him on his path to make sure a day like that never happens again. And while we're on the subject, Kuma once again proved that he was without a doubt the MVP of God Valley in this chapter, because while Ivankov wants to free them to escape, thinking that sticking around to save any more people will put too much risk on their lives, Kuma is determined to stay on the island and save at least one more person. And thankfully he did, because right at that moment, Xebec finally managed to track down both Eris and Teach. The former, who apologizes for being the reason her husband was forced to fight Emu before he was ready, and promises to keep him from having to carry the sin of killing his own family by planning to jump into the ocean with their kid. Which, look, I don't think that was going to work regardless, because as far as we know, Xebec isn't a devil fruit user, so there's nothing stopping him from just jumping in right after them. But even without that, as they got closer to the cliff, a Navy ship notices them, and since they are under direct orders not to let anyone off the island, fires at the three of them directly. So now Eris and Teach are stuck in between two certain deaths, either be killed by the cannon fire or by Xebec. And honestly, as horrible as it may sound, I think she would have chose to jump straight into the cannons if it meant keeping her husband from being the one to end them. Lucky for them though, Kuma jumped in at the very last second, sending the two of them and himself off the island just a moment before both sources of death could land. Again, Kuma is without a doubt the MVP of God Valley. But the first thing I thought of when he did this is that he just saved the guy that would years later go on to attack his daughter and turn her over to the world government. Not that knowing that would have stopped him, because that's just how nice of a guy Kuma is. I just thought that was a wild revelation. Anyway, now we know whether or not Eris made it off the island. And assumedly, she would go on to teach her son everything Xebec told her about Davy Jones, Emu, and the Void Century, which would set him on the path to finish his father's goal of reclaiming their throne. And that's why I think only a member of the Davy clan can inherit Davy Jones's will, because unlike Joy Boy, who is all about freedom, theirs is about birthright. And as the previous rulers of the world and the only surviving member of the Davy clan, Teach is by blood the rightful heir to the throne. Adds a whole new context to when Saturn asked what Blackbeard was after, and his crew answered, the world. It wasn't Emu they were referring to, it was actually the throne. But that's a topic for a different video. Now it's time to get to the climatic setup of the chapter, because once his crew is essentially off the island, and most of the Marines as well, both Roger and Garp unleash a powerful blast of Conqueror's Haki that grabs the attention of Xebec and lures him right to them. And one thing to really point out is that Emu isn't ordering him to do this. And this is all Xebec choosing to go to these two. It's almost like that blast of Haki woke him up just enough to influence his body into seeking them out so that he could beg them to end his life. And I said beg on purpose because that's the state Xebec is in now. He has no hope of overcoming this demonic transformation, and in order to ensure he won't go on to hurt his family or be forced to do Emu's bidding, he needs the two of them to end him. And that is exactly what he asked the two of them to do with his very soul. Which I guess is how we're just casually confirming that Garp also has the voice of all things. We'll have to dive into what that means much later, but the chapter ends with these two stepping up to his plea, planning to work together to take him down. And look, we all saw this coming the moment Xebec was introduced into this flashback. But seeing it happen in real time does hurt, which is wild for me to be feeling this bad about a character that I knew going in was fated to die. But that's how good of a job Oda did of making us actually like him. My only gripe with this, and it might be addressed in the next chapter or two, but I wish Harold was here so that he could reconcile with his friend in Xebec's final moments and see firsthand the true face of the government he's been trying so hard to join. But like I said though, there is still a chance that the King of Elbaf might show up here, and as we transition back into focusing on him in this flashback, this could be the catalyst that led to him betraying the World Gov and reveal exactly what it is he did that led to his death. But you all let me know what you thought about the chapter in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. I've been Zay, and I'll catch you all in the next video.